The gravity well pulsed like a frozen heartbeat on the edge of the cosmos, a silent void within a carved-out moon orbiting a red dwarf. Suspended in its core was the object, a dull, irregular stone slab known simply as the anchor. No one remembered who built the well or why, only that the anchor had never moved. Not once. Not for 10,000 years. A silver-skinned Threxian engineering crew hovered nearby, their triple-lobed craft emitting synchronized gravitational waves. Their lead technician, all fronds and nerves, floated forward and activated their magnetic lattice. The anchor trembled. Sensors screamed. Then, with a dispassionate sigh, the entire lattice imploded. The Threxians retreated, scorched and humiliated. Next, the voice of the council's adjudicator buzzed across the concourse. 24 delegations flinched. The Solari stepped up. Their crystalline ships deployed light particle phase arrays, attempting to quantum thread the anchor's mass into packets of inertia they could unravel. The math was perfect. The theory flawless. The result? A silent shudder, a ripple of light, and nothing. Then came the Korug, brute force believers. They brought drills forged from neutronium and generators that could eat the power of a star. They carved tunnels beneath the stone and detonated a dark matter inversion charge. The explosion cracked half the platform, took out a third of the observation grid, and shifted not one atom of the anchor. This object, intoned the adjudicator, now visibly annoyed, is the gravity itself made stubborn. Any further destruction will disqualify. Who remains? A silence stretched like a funeral sheet. Then, from a modest docking ring off to the side, a gangplank rattled down, and a single human emerged. Oil-stained boots, cargo vest, grease-smudged cheek. A slow grin peeled across his face as he took in the scene. The steaming crater, the drifting debris, and the floating shards of Solari glass still humming from failure. "Hey," he said, to no one in particular. "Y'all done messing it up? Or is it my turn?" The assembled engineers, diplomats, and scientists turned as one. Many had never seen a human before in the flesh. Others narrowed their gaze with a kind of predatory amusement. The Solari delegate let out a noise somewhere between a chime and a scoff. "You are the representative of Earth?" the adjudicator asked, as if trying not to sound insulted. "Caswin," the man said, offering a lopsided salute. "Freelance engineer. I fix things, move things, blow things up sometimes, but only on purpose." There was a ripple of amusement from the Korug, who appreciated that kind of directness. The Solari looked like someone had played off-key music in a cathedral. "You are permitted to observe the site," the adjudicator said. "Submission of any attempt must be within standard cycle parameters. 1 cycle, 1 try. Sounds fair." Cass tapped the side of his head. "I'm a 1 try kinda guy." He made his way down to the gravity sink's edge, alone. No drones. No crew. Just a beat-up backpack and a mechanical monocle he kept flicking in and out of place like a nervous tick. The area surrounding the anchor was a twisted loop of upended mass fields, warped terrain, and artificial tidal zones designed to keep the object perfectly balanced in gravitational deadlock. Cass whistled. "That's some top-shelf nonsense." He pulled a paper notebook from his pocket. "Paper?" Several species gasped audibly. He started sketching angles, pivot lines, vectors. Occasionally, he took measurements with a brass plumb line and a laser rangefinder held together with duct tape and hope. Hours passed. Delegates grew bored. Some watched as novelty. Others prepared polite condolences in advance. At one point, a Korug envoy rumbled over. "You cannot break it. We used everything. Energy, pressure, even time displacement." Cass nodded. "Yeah, I saw. Y'all try to dominate the problem." The envoy's iPods blinked slowly. "And what will you do?" "Persuade it," Cass said. By the end of the day, he had laid out a ring of flags and spray-painted lines across the rock shelf, like a construction site blueprint. A small transport drone flew in from his ship and began offloading crates marked winch, do not drop, and counterweight calibration. A Solari technician observed, blinking rapidly in disbelief. What is that contraption? Cass looked over. Hands on hips. That's a pulley. And over there's a counterweight. Ever heard of a lever? I'm building a really, really big one. The Solari's chimes turned sour. You're building a mechanical solution to a hypergravitational problem? That's the idea. You'll fail. Probably, Cass said, adjusting a bolt. But I'll fail different. That night, in the quiet between solar flares, Cass sat beside his half-assembled rig and stared at the immovable anchor. His voice, when he spoke, was low and calm, like he wasn't talking to a thing, but a presence. They think this is a battle, that you're a riddle meant to be solved with fire and math. But I know what you are. He rested a calloused hand on the ground. You're not stubborn. You're waiting for the right question. Behind him, the alien observers had started whispering, puzzled and unsettled. The human wasn't trying to overpower the problem. He was listening to it. And the gravity well, for the first time in its ancient life, seemed to listen back. The cycle had begun. And for the first time, someone had approached the impossible not with superiority, but with respect. Something shifted, not the stone, not yet, but in the room, in the air, in the odds. Cass stood alone on the scaffold he had built from repurposed mining struts and torn-apart shuttle pylons. The framework wobbled slightly in the artificial gravity, but he didn't seem concerned. His fingers ran along a chain, inspecting links like a jeweler with a gem. A thick mass of counterweights, scavenged from obsolete engine blocks, hung like a guillotine above the gravity well's edge. The alien delegations watched from their sterilized viewing platforms, aghast. The Korg murmured in disbelief. The Solari were openly scoffing now, documenting every clank and cable with passive-aggressive curiosity. Even the adjudicator had ceased formal notation, instead resting his metallic stylus on his lap, as though already composing the failure summary. But Cass moved with quiet precision, oblivious to the doubt around him. Or maybe not oblivious, just unimpressed by it. His eyes narrowed as he recalculated a pivot angle. He spat into the dust, drew a new chalk line, then adjusted the fulcrum position by half a meter. From behind the safety of her translation veil, a Solari envoy approached, curiosity overtaking condescension. You persist with simple machines. As if inertia will obey folklore. Cass didn't look up. Folklore's just science that didn't wait for peer review. You cannot shift the anchor by applying pressure from one side. The gravity well cancels input symmetrically. Yep, Cass said, tightening a joint. So I'm not applying it from one side. I'm applying it from everywhere else. The Solari shimmered uncertainly, their crystalline features flickering. Explain. You see that hill? Cass pointed to a ridgeline off to the west. That's my anchor point. Counterweights go there. When they drop, momentum transfers through this array of pulleys and gearboxes. Instead of pulling the anchor out directly, I'm altering the tension of the gravity vectors around it. Think of it like tipping a cup instead of grabbing the liquid. That is not engineering, the envoy whispered. That's witchcraft with diagrams. Cass gave her a lopsided grin. Witchcraft works best when gravity's involved. He returned to his work. Bolts were tested, cables threaded, pressure seals checked. Each component bore the mark of improvisation, metal from escape hatches, wiring from decommissioned drones, joints sealed with polymer foam from ration kits. But it all fit, and every piece had a purpose. At one point, a curious young diplomat from the neutral Gennari collective ventured closer. You have no team? She asked. No AI schematics? No algorithmic prediction engine? Cass shrugged. Had an AI once. Too smart for its own circuits. Would have said this plan was irrational. And yet you proceed? I've worked with both geniuses and idiots, he said. Geniuses get stuck on why something shouldn't work. Idiots try it anyway. Sometimes, idiots win. She tilted her head. Which are you? I'm the kind who doesn't ask that question until after the thing moves. By midday, the counterweight cradle had been erected. A mechanical loader, really just a gutted maintenance bot, trundled along a track, dragging weights into place. Cass, seated cross-legged, made final notations in his now tattered notebook. Graphite stained his fingertips. Smears of oil striped his cheek. He paused only when the Korg delegate returned, observing the massive tension Will Cass had built from a scrapped satellite dish. "You do not fear failure," the Korg said. Cass tightened a winch. "Fear's useful. It's panic that kills. Your species seeks admiration through defiance." "No," Cass said quietly. "My species survives through it." The wind shifted. Artificial, but still enough to stir dust across the crater floor. Cass stood, brushing off his pants. He took one last walk around the apparatus, eyes roving for signs of structural weakness. He nudged a gear with his foot, adjusted the slack on a pulley, then pulled a worn photograph from his vest pocket. A child's drawing. Crayons. A big man in goggles, standing beside a towering lever. Above it, in wobbly handwriting, "Make it move, Daddy." Cass tucked the paper back inside. "Yeah, kiddo. Just about time." From the observation deck, the adjudicator finally rose. "Human, is this monstrosity your official attempt?" Cass cracked his neck. "Affirmative." "You understand you have one execution. No resets. No corrections." "One pull," Cass said. "That's all I need." The aliens leaned in. Even the Solari had fallen silent. Cass moved to the control lever. It wasn't digital, just a thick rod with a steel pin holding back a mechanical release. He gripped it, knuckles white, took a breath, and smiled. Because everything they'd said, every sneer and dismissal, had pushed him to this moment. The world told him the stone couldn't move. He'd built a reason to prove them wrong. With a sharp motion, he yanked the lever. And gravity, that oldest of forces, began to listen. The pin snapped free with a metallic clang, and the counterweight cradle dropped like a guillotine from the sky. Steel screamed. Cables whiplashed. The entire rig groaned under the sudden transfer of force as mass met motion, and motion demanded obedience. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the anchor shuddered. A tremor rolled across the observation deck. Not seismic, a gravitational distortion, subtle and disorienting. Some alien delegates staggered. Others clutched railings, their equilibrium faltering as the gravity well itself fluctuated in resistance. Below, Cass didn't flinch. The cables pulled taut with terrifying speed, dragging the pulley arms into motion. The primary tension gear spun, its rusted teeth shrieking in protest, but holding. The lodestones dropped into their final sockets, adding exponential weight to the cascade. What had started as a mechanical twitch became a coordinated, brutal pull. The anchor moved again, this time visibly. It shifted perhaps 3 inches, scraping against the warped terrain with a sound like ancient ice tearing free of stone. The readings on the Council's gravimetric sensors spiked. Object displacement, 7.9 centimeters, the adjudicator murmured, tone clipped with disbelief. Correction now 12.4. Gasps erupted across the deck. The Korg erupted into full-throated howls of respect. Even the Solari stood frozen, their crystalline forms refracting in chaotic patterns of confusion. Cass remained still, hand still on the lever, watching the system execute its final motion. The cradle slammed into its stopper. The last cable tensed, wavered, and snapped. The sudden release jolted the entire platform, but it was over. The anchor, unmoved for millennia, now sat askew, tilted, imperfect, undeniably moved. Cass exhaled, long and slow. Not relief. Not triumph. Something quieter. Confirmation. He dusted his hands on his pants and turned to face the delegation gallery. A hush spread like frost over the crowd. The adjudicator, expression unreadable, finally spoke. "This is not possible." "Not your kind of possible," Cass replied, voice dry. "But the stone didn't know that." "You." The Solari envoy stepped forward, visibly rattled. "You used leverage. In a field designed to negate it." Cass pointed to the terrain. "You all tried to beat the well. I just shifted the frame." Didn't need to overpower gravity, just needed to make it slightly uncomfortable. The Gennari diplomat, visibly moved, leaned forward. You respected the forces. Cass nodded. I didn't see an enemy. I saw an invitation. Engineers and observers began descending to inspect the system. They swarmed the still-settling mechanism, muttering in confusion and wonder. Some attempted to scan the chalk markings he'd scribbled, only to find them already smudged by dust and wind. You can't replicate this, the Korug delegate grunted. You felt the build. No simulations. Cass patted his notebook. It's all in here. But if you're hoping for equations, sorry. This wasn't math forward. This was gut first. Cameras hovered. A dozen species networks beamed out the footage. Commentators scrambled to reframe the narrative. Human engineer defies logic, overcomes ancient challenge, humbles the cosmos. Cass win, the adjudicator called. By action of record and observed result, you have succeeded. The anchor has moved. The gravity well has yielded. Cass gave a single, modest nod. Appreciate that. There will be consequences. Not if you take notes. Later, after the crowd dispersed and the accolades began to echo across the sector, Cass stood beside his rig in silence. The wind returned. Dust spiraled in lazy circles. The anchor remained where it was, no longer pristine, no longer impossible. A technician approached, younger, wide-eyed, clearly still reeling. Why did you do it? She asked. You knew it could fail. Everyone did. Cass looked at the crater where the cradle had dropped. Back home, there's a story about a man who said, give me a lever long enough and I'll move the world. Archimedes. Yeah. But no one ever gave him the lever. He paused. I figured it was time someone did. She hesitated. You could have used computers. Simulations. Safer methods. They'd have told me it wouldn't work. He turned to her, eyes steady. And sometimes, knowing the odds just keeps you from trying. When he left the platform, he left nothing behind but scratched chalk, dented gears, and an ancient stone sitting just a little further from where it had always been. But across the galaxy, engineers began rethinking problems they'd called unsolvable. Students asked for chalkboards instead of consoles. And alien cultures, long convinced that progress meant abstraction, found a strange reverence for simplicity. They called it the win principle, not a law, not a formula, but a mindset. One that said maybe, just maybe, the answer wasn't more power. Maybe it was just a better question. And maybe humanity, the unpredictable newcomers from a gravity-bound world, had finally asked it.